Hello, everybody. How many people do we have? Hi. We welcome to this week's digital talk. It's about conflict styles and strategies. If everybody could, when you're in, could you follow the link in the chat and fill in the Excel document when you're in here?
Do you want me to quickly explain what it is?
Yeah. Oh, please do. Yeah.
So this presentation is built on ideas from a guy called Bill, and he has done it's just a couple of questions really that will help you assess what kind of conflict style you normally just use. So everyone has a kind of conflict style that they default to. This is the one that we will do without thinking too much about it. So if you fill in those questions, you will see which conflict style is the one should be indicating which conflict style you go to by default. So without thinking too much about what strategy you should be using. So the way you do it is you just fill in, you look at the different questions, and you can see that it has 1 to 6, and you decide what number fits better with your situation. So say if you've chosen 3, you put a 3 right under where. If you look at where it says 3, it'll have a 0 under it. If you replace that with a 3, and if you do that all the way down and then go back to the top, you'll be able to see that it has calculated which style you normally use most. It's just for fun. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it'll just give you an indication of what is the style that you normally use. And this presentation is really going to give you an opportunity to think about that style and when it is a good idea to use that style, and when you should perhaps thinking about using other strategies.
Okay, so if everybody is able to access that document. Hello, everybody. How many people do we have? Hi. We welcome to this week's digital talk. It's about conflict styles and strategies. If everybody could, when you're in, could you follow the link in the chat and fill in the Excel document when you're in here?
Do you want me to quickly explain what it is?
Yeah. Oh, please do. Yeah.
So this presentation is built on ideas from a guy called Bill, and he has done it's just a couple of questions really that will help you assess what kind of conflict style you normally just use. So everyone has a kind of conflict style that they default to. This is the one that we will do without thinking too much about it. So if you fill in those questions, you will see which conflict style is the one should be indicating which conflict style you go to by default. So without thinking too much about what strategy you should be using. So the way you do it is you just fill in, you look at the different questions, and you can see that it has 1 to 6, and you decide what number fits better with your situation. So say if you've chosen 3, you put a 3 right under where. If you look at where it says 3, it'll have a 0 under it. If you replace that with a 3, and if you do that all the way down and then go back to the top, you'll be able to see that it has calculated which style you normally use most. It's just for fun. You don't have to do it if you don't want to, but it'll just give you an indication of what is the style that you normally use. And this presentation is really going to give you an opportunity to think about that style and when it is a good idea to use that style, and when you should perhaps thinking about using other strategies.
Okay, so if everybody is able to access that document, we'll just have a look at that and then we can introduce and start the talk. So everybody try to fill in that.
I'll stop sharing my screen, so
Okay.
you can share yours. There you go.
Okay. So I'd just like to introduce our speaker and myself. I'm Malcolm. I'm a volunteer with Asfar and another organization here in Bosnia. And today we're hearing from Majbritt Lyck-Bowen, and she is going to speak about her work on conflict resolution. She's a lecturer in reconciliation and peacebuilding at the University of Winchester and a research fellow at the Winchester Center of Religion, Reconciliation and Peace. She's a very experienced facilitator of like a lot of different workshops that involve intercultural awareness, dialogue, conflict management. And I also read that she has been involved in reconciliation and conflict resolving projects in Somalia, Myanmar, and Turkey, among other places. So I'm going to give way for her to tell us about her work.
Thank you. Okay, so you can see the screen now, yeah? My screen?
No. Maybe try again to share it.
I can't see it.
See it now?
Yeah.
Okay, fabulous. Okay, so yes, so today we're going to talk a little bit about conflict styles. So we'll be talking about 5 different conflict styles. And as I said, this is built on ideas by Craybill and quite a lot of other theorists as well in the 70s and 80s developed different models for different conflict styles. So this is just one of these models. But the idea really is to start thinking about how do we normally deal with conflict, and how do we deal with conflict? And when we talk about conflict, I should say, we're talking about interpersonal conflict. So we're talking about kind of conflict that you will find in your community, perhaps with your neighbors, in your family, or in the workplace. And the idea about today really is that we start thinking about what kind of conflict style do we normally use, because quite often you will find yourself actually using a particular conflict style without really thinking about why you're using that conflict style and how it affects the issue that that the conflict is about, and also the relationship you have with the other parties in that conflict. So the idea really is to try to turn these automatic responses into more deliberate responses, so that we start thinking about what is actually, if we know that we're going to be in a situation where there will be some sort of disagreement or conflict, how can we handle that situation a little bit better? Can we choose a different strategy that will fit better with the particular situation? Can we choose a better strategy that, for example, will help us maintain a better relationship with that other party that we are in this conflict or disagreement with? So, and part of the importance of this is really also that the kind of conflict style that we have also really affects the way we look at conflict. So it affects, for example, whether you see a particular situation as a conflict, because sometimes, I'm sure you've been in that situation as well. You've been in a situation where you didn't think there was a conflict, you didn't see there was a disagreement, but another party actually thought, this is actually, this is something that I'm not happy with. I'm not happy with the way this has been dealt with. So it's also, from that point of view, it's also really important to understand what it is your conflict style is. So do you, for example, always try to avoid conflict, or are you very confrontational when you are faced with conflict? These are all really quite important things to start understanding about yourself, and also about what other parties are doing, because hopefully by the end of this presentation, you'll be able to see what style that you use yourself and what strategy you can use yourself, but also what strategy the opponent is using. So you can start basically also not just helping yourself, but helping other people deal with conflict better as well. And the idea really is that once you know your conflict style a bit, you know more about your particular conflict style, you can turn it into a strategy. So it doesn't just become something you do automatically with whatever outcome. That's not necessarily always the best outcome. It actually becomes a strategy of dealing with conflict. Okay, so most people really have one or two conflict styles, and we'll be coming back to what the different conflict styles are in a moment. But most people really have one or two dominant ways that they deal with conflict, and often this is, as I said, often this is not something that they really think about. This is just a default way of dealing with a particular situation, and these particular styles are quite often based on what people have experienced in the past. But the important bit about this really is that you can make conscious choices to change your style. So no matter what your style is, you can make a conscious choice that you want to deal with things differently. And the way we sort of, there's kind of like two different dimensions for these different styles. And again, we'll be coming back to this in a model in a moment. But one dimension is really how much you are concerned about yourself and how much you're concerned about you getting things your way, and how much you're concerned about the others. So how much are you concerned about other people's feelings and ideas and opinions? And it's really important to emphasize here that there is no style that is automatically better than others. In the sense that there's no style that if you adopt a particular style that will always lead to the best outcome. Different styles fit different situations. So it's not if you after having filled in the questionnaire, if you, for example, find yourself in the I'm always avoiding conflict situations, that doesn't mean that that's necessarily a bad thing. There are situations where each of these different strategies, each of these different styles are very good. So it's not that we can say that one style is always better than the other. And hopefully we will be talking a little bit later, or we will be talking a little bit later about what kind of situations it is that you can use the different strategies in effectively as well. And the idea really is that if you are a good conflict manager, if you are good at dealing with conflict, that means that you can use these different conflict styles to particular situations. So you learn to be really aware of what is the strategy, what is the style that you're using, and if you're using a particular style and a particular strategy, how does that then affect the outcome of that situation? Yeah, so we have two different dimensions. One is sometimes called assertiveness. That's basically dimension where your primary objective is to fulfill your own concerns, and this is what you're concerned about yourself. This is in situations where you definitely know you want to get things your way. The other one is sometimes called cooperativeness, and that is obviously where you are looking into, or you are more considering what other people think about it as well, and you're trying to help them come up with a solution, or help each other come up with a solution where both of you are concerned. So we basically end up with a situation where we have high, low, and moderate rankings of these two different dimensions. And this has been this particular idea has been very much developed by this guy called Crable, an American back in the 70s and 80s. And he developed this conflict style inventory. This is the inventory test assessment, which is the one I shared with you on the chat in the chat box. So that's the one you've just gone through. And it's quite important to comparing his framework with other previous frameworks. He makes a really important distinction between calm. So he's saying that there's one way we deal with conflict when the situation is still calm. So that's in a situation where the conflict is just beginning to show. So you're just beginning to realize that there is actually some sort of disagreement here. So he really is arguing that there's one way you deal with conflict in that situation, and there's at times a completely different way you deal with with what he calls a storm. So that's when the conflict has really escalated. Or when there's a previous history of conflict between you. So it's quite important to distinguish between these two different situations. So one is really where there's just a bit of disagreement, the situation has only just started, you otherwise had a really good relationship with this person. And the other one is really the storm, where things have escalated and where there is often also a history of previous disagreement. Okay, so if we then look at this is his model, and I know it's a little bit small, but I will read aloud. So basically, when we look at these two different dimensions, we get 5 different categories of style, 5 different styles really. And hopefully you will have, by having filled out that questionnaire, you will see which one is your default. And sometimes you will find that you have 2 that are very, very close to each other. So you might have 2 where the added number together is very close together. So that just means that you have 2 that works, that are the ones that you default to. But basically, if we look at these, so we have one is where one axis is the agenda, and the other one is the relationship, and that is basically with the same agenda is assertiveness, and relationship is the cooperation, your willingness to cooperate with people. If we first look at the directing one, that's where that's in the situations where you have low focus on the relationship. So you're not really situations where you don't perhaps particularly value the relationship as much as you value being right. So this is where you will have high focus on getting things your way. We also have and we'll be coming back to what the kind of situations is that's a good strategy, because even though I think for most conflict resolutioners that sounds like, oh, we are not really thinking of the relationship, that sounds bad. There are actually situations where that might be the best strategy to use. We also have the one where there's high focus on both agenda and there's high focus on relationship. This is what Crable calls the cooperation one. And this is basically where you have a high focus on relationship and you have a high focus on also getting, having your concerns heard, basically. And this is the situation quite often where people have very opposing opinions about something. That it's really important to spend quite a lot of time on getting to that consensus in the end. We also have the harmonizing. That's where you have a high focus on the relationship and a low focus on your own agenda. Sorry, I can hear someone's microphone. Okay. So that's where you have a high focus on cooperating on relationship, and you have a low focus on getting things your particular way. And again, there are going to be, even though that house sounds a bit negative in some ways, there are situations where that's a good strategy, and we'll be coming back to that in a moment. We also have another style that's avoiding. That's really where people completely avoid conflict. So they're not really bothered about the issue. They're not really bothered about the relationship. They just want to, whatever it takes, they just want to avoid any kind of confrontation and any kind of conflict. And again, there are situations where that's the best strategy. And then finally, we also have compromising. And in my experience, most people who deal with peace building and conflict resolution are somewhere, when they take this test, they are somewhere in the kind of compromising, cooperating area. So this is basically where we are exactly in the middle. So there's sort of a medium focus on getting things your way, getting the agenda through, your own agenda through, and there's medium focus on the relationship. And again, even though this perhaps in some ways sounds like the ideal situation, we'll be coming back to a bit later as to what situations this might not necessarily be the best solution. I should add as well, if you have any questions, please just ask. Okay, so basically we have these 5 different styles for handling conflict. There are no right or wrong style. And I think that's really important to emphasize, because sometimes people can feel that if they end up in the avoidance category, for example. Was there a question?
I was just saying they can write questions in the chat.
Okay. Would you mind if there is a question, because I can't actually see that on my screen? Would you just mind?
Yes, I'll tell you, absolutely. Yep.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I think it's really important to emphasize that there's no right or wrong style. Because I think sometimes people can feel that there is one or two styles that are more sort of politically correct than others, and that's not really the case at all. As you will see, after the end of this presentation, you will see that there is no wrong or right style. It is all of these different styles have their own strengths and weaknesses, and we should all use these different styles in different situations. But we need to be aware of what situations each style is better at. So we need to really be aware of how each of these styles impact the outcome of the conflict or the disagreement that we have, and also how it impacts the relationship with those people in the conflict. And once we are aware of that, we can really try to help ensure that the style becomes a deliberate strategy. And for me, that's really the difference between the style and the strategy. A style is something that you just default to without necessarily thinking too much about it, whereas the strategy bit, when it becomes a strategy, when you're really thinking about it, and you try to use the best strategy in each of these different situations. Okay, so we're going to go a little bit more into what these different strategies are then. So the directing strategy is basically where you are high on assertiveness and you're low on cooperation and relationship. So this is obviously a very forceful approach to conflict resolution. This is where you're really seeking to assert your own will over other people. And I'm sure we all know people who do this quite often. These are people who are quite often people in powerful positions that think that they should always get things their way. Now, the problem with this is obviously that if you do direct too much, you might end up destroying or having, that might end up having a very negative relationship with the people that you are constantly telling what to do, basically. And it might, in the longer run, also actually undermine the effectiveness in your organization, because you lose people's trust, you lose people's faith, you leave people thinking that they have no power, that they have no influence on what's happening around them. On the other hand, if you don't use this strategy enough, you can also create situations where others can take advantage of you. So if you are constantly the one saying, yes, that's fine, don't worry, you go ahead with whatever you think is the best solution, then people might end up taking advantage of you and you will never get your voice heard. So again, we'll be coming back to, there will be times where this is a good strategy and other times where it's not. But these are the things you should be aware of. Okay, so the next one is the cooperating strategy. So that's where you are high on assertiveness and you're also high on cooperation and relationship. So you are high on both wanting things, wanting to have your interests heard, and you're also high on wanting to cooperate and very interested in the other person's or the other person's interest. So here you're trying to both satisfy your own concerns and you're trying to satisfy the concerns of others. Now, the problem with this one can be that if you cooperate too much, you can waste time. So this can quite often, when you use this strategy, it can mean that reaching at a decision can take a very, very long time, because especially if people, whoever it is you've got that disagreement with has very strong opinions and you have very strong opinions as well. Finding a solution that will satisfy both your concerns can be really, really time consuming, and at times it can be impossible. So that you should be aware that when you use this strategy, you are trying to focus on all concerns, but it also has the flip side of that is also that it can take quite a long time to get to any conclusion. And we'll be coming back to what kind of situations that might be really unhelpful. And if you don't cooperate enough, you might also have difficulty gaining cooperation from others. So this again is if you're constantly forcing your own ideas on people, your own concerns, you're only really wanting to listen to your own concerns and your own ideas, that might mean that people lose faith in you. They don't want to cooperate with you, they don't want to compromise with you. Okay, next one is the avoiding strategy. So this is where you're both low on assertiveness and agenda. So you're low on getting things your own way. You're low on, you're not particularly interested in getting this particular issue solved in accordance with your own interest. And you're also low on cooperation and relationship. And this is really the approach. And again, I'm sure we've seen many situations where this happens as well, where people literally just disappear from the conflict. They just walk away. So this is where both parties really refuse to fight and you refuse to give in to the will of the other party as well. So you just walk away from the situation. And again, there might be situations where that's the best option. I think having a teenage daughter, for example, I have definitely learned the hard way that there are times where it's just not worth fighting for. It's better to just walk away and say, let's leave it. Now, the problem with that strategy is obviously if you avoid conflicts too much and too often, you just become a non-player in your organization. People basically stop taking you seriously because they know that the moment there is any kind of disagreement, the moment there is any kind of argument about anything, you just walk away from it. So if you use that strategy all the time, you end up not being taken seriously. You end up never getting things your way at all. On the other hand, if you don't avoid conflict enough, you can also create resentment from other organizations and from other people in your organization or your group. So that means if you're constantly seen as being the one that really enters any kind of conflict, enters any kind of disagreement with full force, then obviously people will also start, people might start resenting you, thinking you're just out to create trouble all the time. So again, there will be times where this is the best strategy. Okay, we also have the harmonizing strategy, and in some ways this is the kind of outcomes of that can be quite similar to the avoiding one. But the harmonizing strategy really is where you are low on assertiveness, but you are high on cooperation and relationship. So with this approach, you are trying to satisfy other people's concerns, and you're sacrificing or ignoring your own concerns. And again, if you harmonize too much with others, you might lose the respect of people in your group. So again, if you're constantly saying, okay, you can have things your way, and I'm not even going to let you know what my opinion is about this. I value our relationship more than that. So I'm just going to listen to you and follow your advice and follow your decisions. Then people might stop taking you seriously again, because they think, well, this person never really have their own opinion about anything. Similarly, as with the other one, if you are never harmonizing with anyone, or not doing it very frequently, you might be seen as being unreasonable. Again, you might be seen as the one constantly engaging in conflict, constantly instigating conflict. And again, that might have a negative, well, it's likely to have a negative impact in that group you're working in, or the group that you're living with. Finally, we also have the compromising strategy. And with the compromising strategy, you are moderate on both these axes. So you're moderate on assertiveness and agenda, and you're moderate on the cooperation relationship one. So this is really the middle ground approach to conflict. Here you're really you're kind of creating an environment where it's quite give and take solutions that partly meet all needs of people. So this way you're creating a situation where people are always kind of give and take. So if I compromise a little bit here, you'll have to compromise a little bit there. The problem with that is that sometimes you can actually compromise too much and you can lose sight of the bigger picture. So for example, if you were in a situation where you actually, could be a strategic meeting in your organization, for example, and you actually know that, you're right in one point. You know that this is really, you full-heartedly believe that this is really the best way. And other people are saying, actually, we definitely don't think this is the best way. And you end up with a compromise that you actually deep inside know is not the best for your organization. That kind of means that you have perhaps lost sight of the bigger picture, and you have actually reached a solution that might not be the best. Obviously, there's also, if you are not compromising enough, if you're always moving towards getting things your way, people might also see you as quite inflexible and stubborn. You are never giving up anything. You're always fighting for your corner. You're always trying to get everything exactly your way without listening to others. Then obviously, you might be seen as being quite inflexible and stubborn as well. Okay, I thought we could just have a quick little break now. Where all of you go ahead and think about a situation where you have applied your preferred default style. If you have done the survey and you have gotten a result out of that, please use that as your default style. If you haven't done the survey, or you don't think that the survey caught what you think your preferred style is, because it's obviously, as you can see it's a fairly simple assessment, and it might not always come with the outcome that you think it should. So use that, if you think that there is that your style is different from the one that the assessment told you, please use the one that you think. So just have a little break. Think about a particular situation where you've been in a conflict or a disagreement, and it can be within your family, it can be in your workplace, in your education, with a neighbor, with anyone from your local community. And think the situation through. So try to see if you can identify what style you used in that. Did you use your default style? How did that style actually affect the outcome? So how did it affect the solution that came out of that conflict? What were the solution? What was the outcome? And also, how did that style affect the relationship with the other people in that particular conflict? So did it have a negative effect on the relationship with these people? Did it have a positive effect? And also have a think about and we'll be coming back to this, the second half of the presentation, but have a think about in which situations do you think your you should apply your preferred strategy. So in which situations do you think that your preferred style is actually really is the best style, is actually a good strategy? What do you think are some of the signs that you're using this strategy too much? And what do you think are the signs that you should use the strategy more? So should we try to take a 10-minute break? You can fill up your coffee cups and tea cups as well. And then we'll be back in 10 minutes.
Yeah, 10 minutes.
Particular issue. I don't necessarily think that my interest is so important anymore. And then you as a conscious choice decide to do something else. So we'll be coming back in a moment to how these different styles can actually work together, and how it might sometimes be a good idea to change your style halfway through, and how you deal with when other people change their style as well, because you can work that in your favor as well.
There was also a question about the impact of dynamics of a group. So like, is there a variation in the effects of the different styles depending on how many people are in a group, and like what are the authority structures of the group?
Yeah, so we'll be coming back in a moment to how power structures, for example, can be really important, and how you can again try to work around that. And I definitely think there is something, because obviously if you are the only one using, if you are in a situation where you are the director of something, you are the boss of a particular group, for example, then you can perhaps easier use the direct side and say this is the way things are. Whereas if you are, if you weren't the boss, then that using that style might be a little bit more complicated. And I think it's also important to emphasize, and we could talk a bit more about that towards the end as well, that there are some really important cultural differences as well here, because this whole conflict strategy is very much developed in a kind of American, North European setting. And I think there are some really important cultural differences, especially around the importance of compromising, for example. I mean, I come from Denmark, for example, where the idea of compromising is really, really important. We don't have a very top-down structure in most organizations. We'll have quite a, everybody will feel quite easy with your boss kind of thing. So in my country, I would say in general, it's quite important to compromise. It's quite important to find solutions that everybody is happy with. Whether there's other cultures where that's not so important, where you have a much more kind of top-down structure, and there are some institutions as well where you have a lot more top-down structure. So I think it really very much depends on the context. Any other questions?
Yeah, there was some also about conflict style, and if people maybe have a mixture of styles, like 2 or 3 which are close together. But maybe you covered that.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite often you will have a mixture of styles, and quite often you will have one style perhaps that's dominant, that's the one that you kind of default to without thinking about it. But certain situations will perhaps force you to use other styles as well. And we'll be coming back to in a moment how you should actually be using all 5 styles, because all 5 styles have strengths and weaknesses, and all 5 styles works in particular ways in particular situations. So I would definitely say most of the time you have different styles, and it's also not that it's not, even when I talk about a default style, it's not that you will always have that as a default style. There might be situations, again, for example, depending on whether it's a calm situation or a storm situation, whether I think it really matters as well who it is that you have that conflict with. We'll be coming back to that as well in a moment. What is the history of the relationship, for example? Is this a person you've known for a long time? How much do you value their friendship, for example, or the relationship that you have with them? So I think that will really influence the style that you use as well. For example, if it's someone you have known for quite a while, you might be more willing to say, okay, we are normally, we're good pals, we normally find a solution together. So if this really means a lot to you, then I'm happy to go with your solution. Whereas if that was a situation with someone you've just met, you might not be so willing to compromise, even if the issue was exactly the same. So I think there are something around the history of the relationship as well. At least we'll be coming back to those kind of questions that you need to ask yourself in these different situations. Okay, so we just continue, and then I'm very happy to take questions at the end of it as well. Okay, so we're now just going to look again at the 5 different strategies, and we're going to look a little bit more about when is a good time to use them, and what kind of outcome do we get, and how does it affect the relationship as well. And then you look at what are the kind of situations, what are the kind of signs that you are perhaps not using these strategies in the right way as well. Okay, so when is a good idea to do the directive strategy? So this is really where you say, this is the way I want things, and I'm not really too bothered about the relationship. This is the way, I want to get things my way. This can be really important if you, for example, need to take a very quick decision. So if there's a case of an emergency, for example, say you were, for example, in a burning building, for example, this is not really the time to sort of start discussing what to do. You say, we have to get out, we have to take this road out, and that's it. Or say you're, the classical situation as well, as if your child is about to run out in the road, you grab them, you take them back. You don't just start having a conversation with them about whether this is the right decision or not. So there might be situations where directing and making that decision swiftly is really important, and that's where the directing style can be really helpful. There might also be situations, and I think most organizations have gone through that, for example, where you have to take an unpopular decision, where it is about cost cutting, for example. So we have gone through that in the university, for example. There's had to be made some redundancies, obviously a very unpopular decision, and we will never be able to compromise on this. So the senior management decide that this is what needs doing. It could also be a good strategy to use if you know that your decision is right. If you're absolutely sure, if you've done a lot of research, if you're absolutely sure that the decision you're taking, the decision you are promoting is the better one for the group, then that might be a good time to use the direct strategy as well. And it might also be a good strategy to use if you're trying to protect yourself from people who are known to take advantage of the non-directing behavior. So if you are with a group of people, for example, who are constantly directing themselves, taking the directing strategy might sometimes be helpful. Okay, so when do we know that we have overused this strategy? If you are surrounded by yes people, for example, so if you are in a group situation and you feel that people are always just agreeing with you, or they are afraid to tell you that they actually disagree with you, then that is one of the clearer signs that you're using the directing strategy too much, you're not listening enough to other people. And also, if you feel that other people are not really sharing their uncertainties or their ignorance with you, if people are not really happy to ask you for extra information about something, or happy to ask you to explain things, then that might mean you are directing them too much as well. You haven't created that climate within that group, family, whatever it is, where people feel that they can actually talk to you about issues. They feel that you're always just doing things your own way. Now, signs of underuse, and this is just as important. So what are the signs that we're not using this strategy too much? If you always feel, or often feel, that you are powerless in a particular group, if you often feel that you are not really being listened to or taken seriously at all, if you're finding it difficult to raise your voice in situations where you should. I mean, we've all been there, haven't we? You've all been sitting in a group meeting and you actually have a really strong opinion about something, but for whatever reason you decide not to voice it. So that's a sign perhaps that you should be more direct in your strategy. The cooperating strategy, when should we use that? That's really when you need to get a solution and the concerns of both parties are too important to be compromised. So this is where you feel that both parties should really be listened to. And this is also really a good strategy when you're actually not so much necessarily focused on reaching a particular conclusion or a particular outcome, but you're really more interested in getting to know what are the assumptions and understandings that other people have. So what are other people's views, basically? This is where dialogue, for example, can be quite helpful. So you're not so much focused on getting a particular outcome out of it. You're really more focused on, obviously finding a solution, but not one particular outcome. But you're very much focused on learning about what other people think about this particular issue. And this can be, for example, really important as well when you have, when you're trying to really find a solution or a strategy for something that you really want people from very different perspectives to agree to. So this is where you're really trying to find something that people can, that both people can have a consensus about. And again, I think there's a cultural difference here as well. There are some cultures where this is more important than others. And it's also a really good strategy to use if you feel that there are some quite hard feelings. If there's quite about a history of conflict within that particular relationship as well, this can be a really good strategy where you really listen to what the other person has to say. You're really trying to understand where they're coming from, and really trying to take their concerns really seriously as well. You're taking them just as seriously as you are your own concerns. Okay, so signs that you're using this too much is if you're constantly feeling in a group, for example, that you are spending time discussing issues to a great depth that really aren't that important. You know, that's where it can almost become that the relationship and listening to everybody becomes more important than the issue itself. So you will feel that that you basically don't get things done. You feel that you are talking and talking and talking and talking and talking, but actually not really reaching any kind of conclusion in many cases. Then that's perhaps a sign that the cooperating strategy is being used a bit too much. Other signs of underuse is if it's difficult for you to see the differences and to see different people's concerns as an opportunity for understanding more about where they're coming from, and understanding where they're coming from, and also finding a better solution. So if you are in a situation where you don't really see difference, and you don't really see people who disagree with you as a good thing, you know, you don't see that as, oh, let's challenge them, you know, let's try and see if we can find a solution that we are both happy with, then perhaps you need to use the cooperating strategy more. I think within an organization, there's also a clear sign if people really are not very committed to the decisions and policies that you have made, then that might also be a sign that you're not using the cooperative strategy enough. Because one of the things that the cooperating strategy obviously does is that, yes, it takes a long time to use the strategy. It takes a long time to find an outcome of whatever disagreement it is you have. But once you have found that outcome, hopefully people are also then committed to that decision that you have come to, because both parties feel that they have been heard. So you are in a situation where you feel that as an organization, for example, or as a family for that matter, you are taking decisions and you're doing, you know, you're creating policies and creating practices, but nobody is actually really trying to implement them. You don't really feel that they're really supportive of that. Then that could be because you haven't used the cooperative strategy enough. You haven't gotten their backing for it, basically. Okay, so avoiding strategy, and as I said, this slide sometimes has a bit of a kind of negative connotation to it, but it actually is quite a powerful strategy in some situations. So this is, for example, good if you feel that the issue really is not very important to you, and when you feel that other issues are more important. So this could, for example, be in a situation where you're in a meeting, you see there's a massively long agenda of things that you have to discuss. And, you know, issue one, you really think, I'm really not really fussed about this, whether that goes one way or the other. You know, you can just step out of it and say, that's fine. It's also a situation you can use if you really feel that there is absolutely no chance of satisfying your concerns. And this can then be because of a lack of power. So it can be you in a situation where you have, you have no power, and that could be in a work situation, for example, where you have a boss that is quite authoritarian. It could also be if it's a situation where the issue that you could be quite passionate about is very difficult to change. Then perhaps just avoiding it is a good idea as well. It's also one of the strategies where you should really think about what the potential cost in situations where the potential cost of confronting a conflict outweighs the benefits of it. So again, you have to think about how important is this issue to me? How important is the relationship with that other person to me? And you really do feel, for example, that if you go ahead with any other strategy, then that will really severely damage a relationship that you really value. It could be with a close family member, for example, or a close colleague or a close friend. Then avoiding the conflict might be the best solution, because you value the relationship that much more. And in the longer run, you think that this is going to be a better solution. It's also a really powerful strategy if you feel that people just need to cool down. It can be really powerful to actually, walk away from a situation. So if you feel that a situation is becoming really heated, for example, this is where you can change your strategy. So if a situation goes from being quite calm, where there's a bit of disagreement, to being quite a heated discussion, walking away from it can be the better solution. It can give people a bit of time to find a different perspective, to compose themselves, to perhaps think differently about the situation as well. It's also a good and similar situation, really. It could also be that you are in a situation where gathering more information about a particular solution could help. So again, walking away from the situation, saying, I just need to do a bit more research on this, or I need to think things through a bit more before I come up with my ideas and opinions about this particular issue, can be really valuable as well. There might also be situations where others can just resolve the issue more effectively, and where you just have to admit that this is not really your area of expertise, for example, where it's better to just say, I'm going to just walk away from it. Okay, so signs that you're overusing this is where you, for example, are causing coordination to suffer because people have trouble getting your input on issues. So this is where people feel you're actually you're not really participating in these decision-making processes. You're not really participating in the group, in the work that the group is doing, because you always walk away. So they are afraid of really asking your opinion about anything, because they think you're just going to walk away from the situation. It could also be a situation where you feel that you're walking on eggshells, where people feel around you that they're walking on eggshells. And this is exactly the situation where if people start feeling that whenever there's just little signs of any kind of conflict, you walk away from it. You end up in a situation where people feel that they can't really share anything with you, because that will make you walk out of the door. It's another sign is also if you're feeling that you are just not really changing things. So if, for example, we've all been in a situation, haven't we, where we think we're sitting and discussing something, and we actually think that this would create a positive change to an organization, for example. But in the end, we end up just walking away from it because we couldn't find a solution to it. We end up saying, okay, let's just do things the way we've always done them, because, this is just creating too much conflict in the group. So again, in terms of progress, that might not necessarily be the best outcome. Sign of underuse is obviously where you are then finding yourself constantly in situations where you are perhaps hurting other people's feelings. You are constantly, or people feel that you're constantly creating problems, you're constantly creating confrontations, you're constantly creating conflicts. That's one sign that you might be using this, you might not be using the avoiding strategy enough. Another sign is also if you feel that you're completely overwhelmed by the number of different issues and decisions you have to make all the time. That might be a sign that you're not really able to prioritize what's most important for you. And again, if you have prioritized them, there might be 1, 2, or 3 different issues where you're not really that fussed about, and that you can just then use the avoiding strategy to walk away from that decision.
Okay, Majbritt, I think we are running out of time, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay.
But we could, maybe now we can do some questions for 10 or 15 minutes. I'm sorry about that. There's not much more time.
Okay.
I'm wondering if people have questions, can they write them in?
Sure.
And the first question I saw was from Rumyana, and she asked if it's okay or if it's a good idea to change your conflict style if you see that it's not working, or if you change your opinion or point of view.
It's definitely okay to change your conflict style midway through. That's definitely recommend. And this is again where I think if you are aware of these different conflict styles, you can change them as you go along. And you can, as I said, there can be things happening within that particular conflict that means that perhaps something that you thought was really important to you no longer seems so important to you. There might also be times where you feel that actually, if I get things my way, that's going to affect the relationship with that other person a lot more than I really thought. I can see that this other person is a lot more passionate about it. Actually, after having listened to what they had to say about the issue, I can see that this is affecting them a lot more than I ever thought it would. And then, you can change your style accordingly by saying, actually, I value that relationship more, and I can see that this is really going to affect you. So I'm going to back off, for example, or I'm going to, be less concerned about my concerns and interests, and more about others. I would quickly just go through this list of things that I think you should be really thinking about. Really, how important the issue is for you and the other. And So is it the issue more important, or is the relationship more important? What are the different consequences and outcomes of this particular conflict as well? And again, both think about in terms of the issue and the relationship. How much do you value that other person as well? Is this a person that you want to have a positive relationship with in the future? Because then perhaps you should change your strategy accordingly. How much do you trust them as well? What is the previous relationship you've had with them? So if you've had a long-standing relationship with them, you know a bit more about where they're coming from as well, and you can adjust your style accordingly. And also, I think it's also really important that you always have a think about what time and energy do you actually have to enter a particular conflict. Because you are, especially if you are in a group, for example, where there's quite often conflict, you know, you might want to choose your battles. You might want to think, is this really worth fighting for? Okay, any other questions?
I don't have any, but I have one of my own, which is,
okay, go ahead.
I can see from your career that you've worked in like specific contexts, and I guess I'd like to know, how does this apply when you're dealing with like a much bigger conflict, rather than just between two people, but between groups of people or between different nations, and how can this be used in a bigger context?
I mean, I think if you have a very good idea about your own conflict style, it can help you understand other people's conflict style as well. And it can happen, even if you are in a bigger group, you can start pinpointing what are actually the styles that different people are using. And you can perhaps start asking them questions about why it is that they're using them. Because again, I think quite often people use a particular style without really thinking about why are they actually using that particular style. So I think you can use it to start questioning when you're facilitating, for example. Start questioning, why is it that you're using this particular style? Why is this so important for you? Have you thought about the issue? Have you thought about the relationship? I also think you can use it when you're trying to sort of prep people to go into a situation. So, you know, you can use it yourself as well as a prep. You can think the different strategies through if you know you're going into a difficult situation, and you can do the same with a bigger group as well. I think a lot of it is really for people to be aware of why they're reacting in certain ways, why they're using particular styles, and what the consequences of that are as well. Because I mean, we've had quite a few workshops where you tell people about these different styles, and they think, okay, actually, you know, so I can see if I use this particular style, I'm actually really damaging the relationship. I hadn't really thought about it like that beforehand. You know, that it had that big of an impact on people, and that there were other ways I could argue that wouldn't have that impact on people. So it's about, I think a lot of it is to get people to think about what these different strategies are really, and how you can use them effectively. I'm not sure that in the kind of at a sort of national, international level that it would necessarily work particularly well, because I think diplomacy is quite different there. I mean, I think you'd have to look a lot more on power relations, isn't it? I mean, it's many of the kind of peace agreements that are made are more made when people come under extreme time pressure, and then I'm not necessarily saying that is the best outcome. I think people end up in taking decisions because they're under a lot of time pressure, and they're under a lot of pressure. And I mean, as we've seen in many peace agreements around the world, they haven't really then been implemented particularly well, and they haven't really been upheld. And perhaps part of that is because it has been participatory enough, because people haven't used the kind of more cooperative strategies enough. It's more been, this is the way, you know, the US have more been, this is the way we want things to be, and you know, using the direct style a bit too much.
Okay, yeah, that's really interesting. Just before anyone else, if they have any other questions, we will send over these slides to everyone who was registered for the talk, and also you will receive the Excel document so you can fill in the survey if you didn't do it at the start. Yeah, does anybody else have another question? You can write in the chat, or to be honest, you can just turn on your microphone and ask.
Is that okay if we share the slids?
Yeah, of course it is. Yeah, definitely.
I was just checking.
No, that's well fine.
Okay, so we have no more questions. Okay, I think that's everything for today. So I'd just like to thank Majbritt for speaking to us. It was really informative. I think it's going to cause a lot of reflection. So Thank you, and thank you to everybody who came. Our next digital talk is on the 27th of January, correct me if I'm wrong. And it's with Simon Mabon. I don't know what it's about actually. Jade, do you know what it's about?
So the talk on the 27th is with Simon Mabon, who is a lecturer at Lancaster University who focuses on the Middle East, terrorism, securitization, and his talk is on it's a new path for peace building. Let me just find the exact title, but we will start sharing any promotional material for that very soon. So that'll be on the 27th. We don't have one next week, but we will share the video for this talk on Wednesday. So let me just quickly find the okay, I can't find it right now. But thank you all, and thank you, Majbritt.
All right, take care.
Thanks everybody. Bye bye.